The Colorado air outside Fort Hardison bit at the skin, crisp and thin, carrying the scent of pine and diesel from the tanks parked along the base. Inside Hangar 7, the smell was metallic, sweat, oil, and the faint burn of spent training rounds. Soldiers moved in tense precision across the concrete floor, their boots echoing like the heartbeat of the base itself. But none of the regular noise, shouted commands, clanging equipment, the roar of engines, mattered when General Royce Carter entered. He didn't just enter a room, he owned it. Broad shoulders and a chest full of medals announced decades of rank, command, and intimidation. His sharp eyes scanned the hangar, a predator assessing prey. Anyone could feel the chill as he walked past, a storm cloud in human form. Soldiers straightened, instinctively ducking under his gaze, hopping not to draw attention. But then he noticed her. Ava Beck, petite, lean, and almost invisible among the towering soldiers, zipped up her field kit as she prepared for the interbranch readiness drill. Navy medic, youngest in her cohort, with a face too calm to betray her nerves, she had transferred here just weeks earlier. Everyone assumed she'd blend in quietly. Everyone assumed wrong. Carter's lips twisted. "And who's this?" he barked, his voice like gravel scraping metal. The hangar went suddenly quieter, heads turned, unsure of how the general would react to a Navy medic showing no fear. Ava straightened. "I was assigned, sir," she said, calm, neutral, almost eerily composed. Carter's jaw twitched. A shadow of a smirk formed but disappeared just as quickly. He was not used to calm, not from someone like her, someone small, someone irrelevant. He strode closer, boots echoing on the concrete, and leaned down slightly, forcing her to tilt her head up. "You think being quick makes you strong?" he asked, voice a low rumble. Ava's eyes didn't waver. "It makes me capable, sir," she replied. The words were simple, the tone was flat, but it was enough to make the general's patience snap. The drill began. Smoke grenades filled the air, alarms blared, and chaos reigned in every corner of the hangar. Soldiers simulated casualties, shouted orders, and crawled over obstacles with precision. Ava moved with sharp efficiency, tending to a downed Marine, wrapping a splint with hands that didn't tremble, calling out instructions calmly. Soldiers stopped in their tracks, astonished at the precision and speed of her work. Carter noticed. His eyes narrowed. Ava finished her task and stood, eyes scanning the hangar as if nothing had happened. Carter stalked toward her, fast, heavy boots thudding on concrete. "Come here," he ordered. Ava did not move immediately. Her calm demeanor made him more dangerous than ever. She finally stepped forward, careful, measured. "You think you can just walk in here, play at being a soldier, and ignore the chain of command?" Carter snapped. "You're a Navy medic. Your place is in the field treating casualties, not telling generals how to run an exercise." Ava's reply was quiet but sharp. "Sir, I follow orders, I just don't follow abuse." The general's face darkened, a storm rolling over him. He leaned down suddenly, a foot lifted. The motion was so quick it was almost imperceptible. And then it happened. Carter kicked her ribs. Ava staggered back, breath punched out of her lungs, her small frame wobbling. Gasps echoed across the room. Soldiers froze, stunned, unsure whether to intervene. Carter's lips curved in a cruel smirk. "Weak, huh?" he said. The words hung in the air. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Ava gritted her teeth, fighting through the pain. Her ribs screamed, but her posture did not collapse. Before she could inhale again, a shadow appeared behind Carter. A shadow that sent a ripple through the room like the sudden pull of a storm. Lieutenant Mason Beck, Navy SEAL, veteran, and Ava's older brother, stepped forward. Broad, muscular, and lethal even in his calm, relaxed stance. He had served countless deployments, saved lives in situations no one could imagine, and had never raised his voice unless it was to give a kill or save order. Now, standing behind Carter, Mason's presence alone was enough to silence the hangar. Carter turned slowly, scanning the SEAL behind him. His smirk faltered. Mason's eyes were cold, precise, unyielding. Every fiber in Carter's body registered that this was no ordinary soldier. "You kicked my sister," Mason said softly. Not a shout, not a warning, just a statement that carried the weight of a coming storm. Carter puffed his chest, trying to regain authority. "She insubordination." Mason took a single step closer. The room seemed to shrink. "Say it again," he said, low, deadly quiet. Carter blinked. "I maintain discipline," he spat, trying to sound authoritative. Mason's jaw flexed, the kind of subtle movement that meant his patience was thread-thin. "By assaulting medics." A murmur ran through the soldiers. None had ever seen a confrontation like this. Carter's face turned red, not from anger, but from realizing that his intimidation tactics were ineffective here. "You don't intimidate me. I outrank you," Carter said, voice rising. Mason leaned in, closing the distance. "That won't matter in 3 seconds," he said. The general's eyes flickered, a spark of uncertainty. 3 seconds for what? Mason's calm exhale was the only answer. For everyone watching, the tension was palpable. Time seemed to slow. 3 seconds. The countdown was invisible, but it was felt in every tightening muscle, every held breath. 1, 2, Mason's movements were subtle, precise, a predator waiting to strike. Carter's confidence, built over decades, began to crumble. He had underestimated her, and now he had underestimated Mason. 3. And in the blink of an eye, Mason stepped forward. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with controlled, devastating force. Carter stumbled, a foot catching on the metal floor, his own weight working against him. The general fell, a thundering crash that made the hangar floor vibrate beneath the soldier's boots. The room went silent. Mason stood above Carter, steady, precise, calm. But behind him, Ava struggled to her feet, clutching her ribs. Her face, pale and determined, betrayed the hint of pain she tried to hide. Everyone in the hangar felt it. The shift in power, the line crossed. And in that frozen second, no one spoke, no one moved. Except one person, Carter. His smirk was gone. His pride, his authority, his decades of command, crumbling in 3 seconds flat. And Mason, still silent, still controlled, let the weight of his gaze press down. Carter's eyes flicked from Ava to Mason and back again. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Ava exhaled shakily. She hadn't spoken, hadn't moved except to survive the kick, but she could feel Mason's presence, his protection, his warning. Any further harm would have consequences she couldn't bear alone. And that was the moment the room realized it. General Carter had underestimated both a Navy medic and a Navy SEAL. And the storm had only just begun. The hangar was silent, but it was the kind of silence that buzzed in the ears, the calm before a storm. Dust motes floated in the pale morning light, motes that no one noticed because all eyes were locked on the scene. General Carter sprawled on the cold metal floor, his pride shattered, and Mason Beck standing over him like a predator. Ava pressed her hand to her ribs, each inhale sending sharp jolts of pain up her side, but she stood upright, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. Mason's eyes were fixed on Carter, unblinking, unyielding, and the general's smirk had dissolved entirely, replaced by confusion and the barest hint of fear. Mason's voice finally cut through the charged air, not loud, but low, quiet, precise. "General, step away from her." Carter's head snapped toward him. "And you are?" "Lieutenant Mason Beck," the SEAL said, his voice carrying the weight of countless operations in hostile zones. He didn't need to shout. Authority and danger radiated from him like heat. "And I don't tolerate assault on a Navy medic." Carter scoffed, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I maintain discipline here. That girl," he gestured vaguely at Ava, "was insubordinate." Mason's gaze sharpened. "She saves lives. What do you do, sir?" The soldiers in the room had gone silent, frozen by the electric tension. Carter's lips pressed together. No one had ever spoken to him like this in decades of command. "You don't intimidate me," Carter said finally, puffing up. "I outrank you." Mason leaned in, just slightly, enough to make Carter tip his chin up. "That won't matter in 3 seconds." Carter's confident glare wavered. He blinked once. 3 seconds for what? Mason's exhale was almost imperceptible, but the entire hangar felt it, calm, controlled, and deadly. Soldiers instinctively tightened their stances, anticipating action. Carter's mind raced. He had faced insurgents, rebels, and hostile environments across the globe, but he had never faced someone who radiated calm fury like this. He could feel the unspoken threat. One misstep and he would be on the floor again. Only next time the consequences would escalate. Mason's lips barely moved. "For you to understand the mistake you've made." The room collectively held its breath. Ava fought to stay upright, each exhale rasping painfully through her ribs, but she refused to give in. Her eyes flicked to Mason, and in them was a mixture of relief and fear. She knew he would protect her, but she also knew he could not take away the pain she carried. And then Mason moved. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't shout. He simply closed the distance with the precision of a predator. Carter stumbled backward over his own boots, falling hard, the metallic echo of impact reverberating through the hangar. The soldiers froze. Time seemed to slow as Mason's gaze held the general down. His knee was planted firmly near Carter's chest, his hand gripping the wrist with a joint lock so precise that half the soldiers instinctively winced. Carter's face was red, not from exertion but from humiliation and fear. "Get off me," he barked, voice shaking. Mason's calm response cut sharper than any blade. "You kicked my sister. Say it again." Carter gritted his teeth. She was insubordinate. Mason shifted the pressure in the hold, tightening just slightly. The kind of adjustment that hurt without leaving marks, designed to make Carter understand his place without destroying him physically. Carter gasped. His pride fought against the pain. "Mason, Lieutenant, stop. That's an order." "You're not in a position to give one," Mason said flatly. Carter's face twisted in desperation. Fine, I'll apologize, just stop." The general's words were forced, trembling. The smirk that had once been his shield was gone. For the first time in a long and storied career, Carter felt powerless. Mason didn't release him immediately. His gaze flicked to Ava, who was swaying slightly, pale from the kick she had received. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a stab of pain. Mason's jaw tightened. Carter's misjudgment had caused more than humiliation. It had put Ava in danger. That realization hardened his grip. Ava's voice, low and measured despite the pain, finally broke the silence. "I didn't need him to hurt you," she said quietly. "I just needed you to understand." Carter looked up at her, his eyes wide with shock. He had not anticipated this. Her resilience, her composure, the sheer defiance in her gaze. Mason's eyes, however, were calculating. He noticed her pale lips, the subtle tremor in her hands. The kick had been harder than she let on, and now her condition was worsening. His mind raced. He needed to get her help immediately, but he could not let Carter escape accountability. Carter's voice cracked as he tried to reclaim control. "Enough," Mason interrupted. His calm authority was unshakable. "She's hurt. You've done enough." The tension in the room was tangible. Soldiers who had once followed Carter unquestioningly now watched their general flounder. Some shifted nervously, realizing that this confrontation was unlike anything they had seen before. Carter scrambled back, trying to push himself up, but Mason's knee remained, steady, controlling. Carter's breathing grew erratic, his eyes darting between Ava's calm, pained expression and Mason's unwavering glare. Finally, Mason released him, standing fully and stepping back, but his presence still loomed large. Carter pushed himself upright, his pride visibly shattered. his face pale with a mix of embarrassment and fear. He had underestimated both a Navy medic and a Navy SEAL. That miscalculation would haunt him. Ava pressed a hand to Mason's arm, a faint tremor in her voice. "I'm okay, really." Mason's eyes softened briefly, but his protective stance remained. "You shouldn't be," he said quietly, "and that's exactly why he won't walk away from this." Carter, finally regaining some control over his trembling limbs, looked around at the soldiers now staring at him. The room had shifted. The hierarchy had been challenged. The general's authority had been publicly undermined, and every eye in the hangar had seen it. He forced himself to speak, voice shaking but trying for dominance. This isn't over. You, both of you, will regret this." Ava's eyes narrowed, pain and defiance mixing. "We'll see about that, sir," she said. The soldiers murmured among themselves, the tension still thick in the air. Carter's eyes flicked back to Mason, who simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, signaling that any further misstep would be met with consequences far worse than a kick. And in that moment, the hangar realized something terrifying for the general. His reputation, his control, and his power meant nothing against the combination of skill, principle, and sheer courage embodied by a Navy medic and her SEAL brother. Carter's gaze darted to the doorway, half expecting reinforcements, but there was none, only soldiers, watching, judging, recording the breakdown of a man who had never known to be challenged. Ava swayed slightly and Mason caught her arm, steadying her. His voice was barely audible. "Let's get you checked. You're hurt more than you realize." Carter's smirk returned, but it was forced. His eyes burned, not with anger but with panic and perhaps a sliver of fear. For the first time in decades, he was not the one in control. And in the hangar, every soldier understood. The next moments would determine the general's fate, and Ava and Mason had only just begun. The tension did not release. It only grew heavier, like the storm clouds over the Colorado mountains outside, ready to break at any second. The hangar seemed to shrink around the three of them. Dust motes floated like tiny sparks in the golden morning light, but no one noticed them. All attention was fixed on General Carter, sprawled awkwardly on the cold metal floor, and Mason Beck, the Navy SEAL whose calm had become a weapon sharper than any blade. Ava pressed a trembling hand to her ribs. Pain radiated with every breath, a reminder of the brutal kick she had barely survived. She wanted to speak, to tell Mason she was fine, but the words lodged in her throat. All she could do was stare at Carter, her eyes icy and unyielding, demanding acknowledgement of the insult he had inflicted. Mason, however, didn't break his gaze from the general. His calm precision was like a trap snapping shut, controlled, inevitable, and terrifying. Carter had underestimated him. He had underestimated the resolve that ran in Mason's veins, a resolve forged in firefights, hostage rescues, and survival missions that no civilian could comprehend. "You kicked my sister," Mason said quietly, his voice low, deliberate. Every word pressed against Carter's chest harder than any physical blow. Carter puffed his chest, trying to mask the fear creeping into his eyes. She was insubordinate." Mason shifted slightly, tightening the hold on Carter's wrist in a way that sent a sharp jolt of pain up the general's arm. Not enough to injure, but enough to force awareness. "Discipline does not mean assaulting medics," Mason said softly, each syllable measured, surgical, slicing through the general's bravado. The room was electric. Soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. They had all trained for combat scenarios, but nothing prepared them for the human drama unfolding before their eyes. A decorated general humbled by the calm precision of a Navy SEAL. Carter struggled under Mason's hold, his face red and tense. I am a general. You will release me," he barked. Mason's jaw tightened, his control unbroken. "You overstepped. Apologize to her." Carter's pride flared, then faltered. The words caught in his throat. He had commanded battalions, directed operations in foreign lands, and faced life-and-death decisions hundreds of times. But now, in front of a room full of soldiers and his own humiliation laid bare, he was powerless. Ava's voice broke the silence, barely above a whisper. "You don't have to hurt him," she said, pale but steady. "Just make him understand." Carter looked at her, confusion and disbelief flickering across his face. He had expected fear, tears, maybe even begging, but this calm, controlled defiance unsettled him. Mason's gaze flicked toward Ava. She was swaying slightly, her hand gripping her ribs. He felt the subtle but unmistakable signs of internal pain, a threat he had to address before it became life-threatening. He couldn't let Carter's arrogance cause her permanent harm. He released Carter slowly but kept a protective presence close. Carter scrambled backward, trying to reassert dominance, but his confidence had been shattered. The soldiers in the hangar, once obedient and tense under his authority, now watched silently, witnessing the rare spectacle of a general humbled. Carter attempted a shaky smile. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. Both of you will regret this." Ava's gaze hardened, a mixture of pain and defiance. "We'll see about that, sir," she said. Mason remained close, vigilant. His eyes scanned Carter, measuring every twitch, every subtle movement. His mind calculated risks, planning contingencies for every possible reaction. He knew the general's pride could provoke desperate, dangerous behavior. Then a voice cut through the tension. A medic stepped forward. "Lieutenant Beck, we need to get her checked. Now." Mason immediately moved to support Ava, slipping an arm under her shoulders. She tried to protest. "Mason, I'm fine." "You're not," he interrupted quietly but firmly. "You shouldn't be." Carter watched this unfold, his own face a mix of frustration and fear. He had thought that a kick would silence her, that it would reinforce his authority, but it had done the opposite. It had revealed his weakness in a way he could not control. Mason guided Ava toward the exit, his eyes never leaving Carter. Every step was deliberate, ensuring no one could interfere and that Carter could not attempt another act of aggression. Soldiers parted, giving them space, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. Suddenly Carter's voice rose, sharp and commanding. "Stop her. She belongs in line. She is a subordinate." Mason stopped for a heartbeat, pivoted slightly, and fixed Carter with a look that silenced him instantly. "She belongs to no one who thinks abuse is discipline," Mason said. Ava's breathing was shallow, each inhale a reminder of the kick's impact. Mason's hand pressed lightly against her ribs, assessing, supporting, ready to act. Every second counted. He knew bruising could become a serious internal injury if ignored. They reached the infirmary doors, but a figure blocked the way. A high-ranking officer, expression unreadable, stood with arms crossed. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Lieutenant Beck," he said, voice steady. "You'll wait outside. She's in my care now." Mason's brow furrowed. He didn't like being stopped, but he weighed his options quickly. He could not risk further harm to Ava by challenging the officer here. He nodded once, silently acknowledging the instruction while keeping his eyes sharp on both Ava and Carter. Inside the infirmary, Ava collapsed slightly onto the table, pale and trembling. I'm fine," she insisted, though her voice cracked under the strain. Mason ignored her protests, moving to her side. He pressed his fingers lightly against her ribs. She flinched. "Internal bleeding," he murmured, almost to himself. His eyes hardened. That kick could have broken more than ribs. Ava's hand went to his arm, trembling. "I can manage," she whispered. "It's just a scratch." Mason's jaw tightened. This isn't about toughness. It's about survival, and you just survived his arrogance by inches. Outside, Carter's figure appeared at the infirmary window, pale and flushed. His eyes darted nervously, assessing the SEAL and the medic he had underestimated. Pride and authority wrestled with fear, and the result was a man who had no idea how to regain control. Mason's gaze flicked to the general, and in that moment both men understood. Carter had miscalculated, and the cost of his arrogance was only beginning to reveal itself. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until a medic entered with vital monitoring equipment. Mason remained at Ava's side, his body a shield between her and the world outside. Carter's eyes followed every movement, a flash of panic crossing his face as he realized the consequences of his actions could escalate beyond anything he had imagined. Ava exhaled slowly, trying to stabilize herself, but the faint tremor in her voice betrayed the internal pain she carried. Mason's hand tightened lightly, a grounding presence, a silent promise that she would not face this alone. Carter took a step back from the window, swallowing hard. For the first time, he saw the vulnerability of those he considered weak, and the strength that came from protecting those who could not always defend themselves. And then a new sound, the soft click of a door opening, footsteps approaching the infirmary. Mason's eyes narrowed. He knew trouble was coming, but what kind of trouble, administrative, legal, or something far worse, remained to be seen. Ava's voice trembled, whispering to him, "Mason, what now?" Mason's eyes remained locked on the approaching figure. Calm, deadly, precise, he replied, "Now, we make sure this isn't swept under the rug." The hangar, the corridors, and the base beyond seemed to hold their breath. A battle had begun, not with weapons, but with truth, courage, and consequences that no rank could shield. And somewhere, behind the infirmary doors, General Carter realized that for the first time in decades, he was not in control. The storm had only just begun. The fluorescent lights of the infirmary cast a harsh, clinical glow across the room, illuminating every detail of the chaos that had followed the hangar confrontation. Ava Beck lay on the examination table, her pale skin stark against the sterile white sheets. Each shallow breath sent jolts of pain radiating through her ribs, but her eyes were fixed, determined, refusing to betray weakness. She had survived Carter's kick, but barely. Mason Beck never left her side. Even in a room designed for healing, his presence was a shield. Every movement, every step he took was calculated, protective. His eyes scanned the room with a predator's vigilance, tracking every shadow, every footstep, every potential threat. The moment he had released Carter in the hangar, he had known one thing: this was far from over. "You're hurt worse than you realize," Mason murmured, his voice low, calm, but edged with steel. He pressed gently against her side, assessing the damage. Ava flinched, her breath catching. "I said I'm fine," she whispered, her voice quivering despite her attempt at control. "No," Mason corrected, voice firm. "Not fine, you're bruised. There's internal bleeding. I can feel it." Ava tried to sit up, stubbornness burning through her discomfort. "I can handle it. I've been through worse." Mason's eyes darkened. Not this time. You're not alone in this fight, Ava. Let me help you." Before she could protest further, a team of medics entered, wheeling a cart with diagnostic equipment. The tension in the room was palpable. Ava's face remained pale, but her eyes flicked toward Mason with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She knew she could trust him, but the humiliation and pain she carried made her defensive. Mason moved to position her for examination. "You're going to let me do this," he said softly, his tone brooking no argument. Ava's lips pressed into a thin line, but she allowed him to adjust her, supporting her lightly under the shoulders. "Vitals first," a medic said, attaching monitors to her wrists and chest. Beeping noises quickly filled the room. Ava winced at every touch, but Mason's presence reassured her. Outside the infirmary window, General Carter loomed, his pale face pressed against the glass. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, a mixture of rage, embarrassment, and fear crossing his features. He had never expected to see his authority challenged, and the sight of Ava and Mason working in tandem, calm and unflinching, was a blow to his ego that he couldn't yet process. Mason's attention remained on Ava. "Internal bleeding is subtle," he muttered, mostly to himself. He leaned closer, his hands moving with precision to stabilize her posture. "If we don't monitor this, it could worsen fast. You understand?" Ava swallowed hard, nodding slightly, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her resolve. I understand." The medics worked quickly, running diagnostic scans and noting the results. "Fractured rib," one reported. "Small internal bleed, stabilizing but continued monitoring required." Mason's jaw tightened. He had anticipated bruising, but the internal injury was worse than expected. He shifted slightly, supporting Ava so she could breathe with less pain. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Mason asked quietly, his voice soft but heavy with concern. "I didn't want you to worry," she admitted. Her lips trembled, but she kept her gaze fixed on him. "You already fight too many of my battles." Mason's eyes softened, but his vigilance never wavered. "You're my sister. That's not your burden to bear alone." Silence stretched in the room, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Outside, Carter's eyes never left the scene, his hands pressed against the glass. His pride was shattered, his authority undermined, and he knew it. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless, an emotion foreign, bitter, and humiliating. Ava shifted slightly, and Mason caught her immediately. "Steady," he whispered, guiding her movement so she wouldn't aggravate her injury. Her fingers brushed his arm, weak but determined. "Mason, I can manage," she insisted, but the strain in her voice was evident. Mason's gaze hardened. "No, you can survive a battlefield, but you can't survive this alone, not this time." As the medics worked, the infirmary doors opened, and a high-ranking officer entered. His presence immediately altered the room's energy. Mason straightened, his hand subtly shielding Ava from the unexpected figure. "Lieutenant Beck," the officer said, his voice even but firm, "I need you to step aside. The patient is in my care now." Mason's eyes narrowed, calculating the risk. "Sir, I'm not stepping aside. She's stable, but she's not out of danger. I need to ensure she's safe." The officer's expression didn't change. "This is not up for negotiation. Step aside." Mason's jaw tightened. He knew confrontation could escalate tensions further, but he also knew he couldn't leave Ava vulnerable. He took a deliberate step back, but kept his presence close enough to intervene if needed. Meanwhile, Ava's gaze flicked to Carter. His figure outside the window was tense, his face pale and twisted with frustration. Every muscle screamed his desperation. For the first time, he realized that his reputation, his authority, and his power meant nothing in the face of truth, skill, and courage. Ava's voice was soft but determined. "He doesn't get to intimidate me anymore." Mason's hand pressed lightly against her shoulder. "No, he does." Ava's breathing remained shallow, her fingers clutching the sheet beneath her. Mason could feel the subtle tremor in her hands and the slight paleness returning to her lips. He knew this wasn't just a physical recovery. It was emotional, psychological, and deeply personal. Suddenly, a familiar sound echoed through the infirmary hallway, the soft click of a door opening, footsteps approaching. Mason's eyes snapped toward the sound. He could feel the tension spike immediately. Every instinct screamed that more complications were arriving, and the source could be Carter himself or someone sent to defend him. Ava noticed his shift and whispered, "Mason, what now?" Mason's eyes stayed on the approaching figure. "Now, we make sure this isn't swept under the rug," he said, his voice steady but laced with warning. The approaching figure emerged into the infirmary, a legal officer from the JAG Corps, clipboard in hand, expression sharp, eyes calculating. Mason's body remained taut, ready for any escalation. "Lieutenant Beck," the officer said, voice crisp, "I need your statement regarding the incident in the hangar. We are initiating an official review." Carter's face, visible through the infirmary window, drained of color. The presence of JAG meant legal consequences were no longer theoretical. His arrogance, his impulsive aggression, and his assault on a subordinate were now under scrutiny. Ava exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and fear. Mason remained at her side, his presence a stabilizing anchor. "We'll face this together," he whispered. Carter's shoulders sagged slightly, his eyes darting between the SEAL and the medic who had defied him. The humiliation was compounded by the knowledge that his actions could have long-term consequences, consequences that would reach far beyond the hangar or the infirmary. Mason's gaze shifted back to Ava, assessing her vitals and her posture. "You're tougher than most soldiers," he murmured, "but even the toughest need support sometimes." Ava's lips curved into a faint smile, despite the pain. "I'm learning," she whispered. Outside, the base seemed to hold its breath. The storm that had begun in the hangar was far from over. The confrontation with Carter had sparked a chain reaction, legal, emotional, and institutional, that would not end quickly. And in that moment, Mason realized something critical. Protecting Ava wasn't just about surviving a single attack. It was about navigating a system that often rewarded arrogance over integrity. The infirmary doors closed softly behind the approaching JAG officer, and Mason's eyes never left Ava's face. Every muscle in his body was ready. Every instinct was alert. Because somewhere outside, Carter was plotting his next move. And Mason knew it wouldn't be long before the general tried again. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. Ava Beck lay on the examination table, her ribs throbbing with each shallow breath, but her eyes burned with quiet defiance. Every inch of her body protested, but she refused to show weakness. Mason Beck, calm but tense, remained at her side, his presence both shield and warning. Outside the infirmary, General Carter paced like a caged predator. His once commanding presence was now fractured by humiliation, pain, and growing desperation. His hands clenched and unclenched as he muttered under his breath. Officers passing by noted his unusual behavior, something rare in a man who had spent decades mastering control and intimidation. Inside, the JAG officer had finished recording preliminary statements from witnesses and medics. His eyes were sharp, calculating, and even the general could sense the weight of their scrutiny. Carter's previous authority meant nothing here. The law, procedure, and evidence were now the predators, and he was the prey. Mason didn't speak, but his hands hovered near Ava, ready to catch her at the slightest falter. She pressed her fingers to her lips, biting back the pain that radiated through her side. Her breaths were shallow and uneven, but she refused to let them see fear. Carter's voice, muffled but venomous, drifted faintly through the infirmary window. "You can't get away with this. This is my base, my authority." Mason's eyes narrowed. "Authority doesn't give you the right to hurt people." Carter's jaw clenched. He had tried intimidation, attempted to assert dominance physically, and failed. His pride had been shattered in the hangar, exposed in front of everyone, including his subordinates. And now, facing legal scrutiny, he felt a rare, suffocating panic. Inside the infirmary, Ava tried to sit up, ignoring the pain. "Mason, we need to talk to JAG," she said softly, her voice trembling but firm. Mason's eyes met hers. "We will, but not while you're this vulnerable. Let them take the initial statements. Then we'll make sure your side is heard." Ava exhaled, her fingers pressing lightly against the monitor strap. I didn't expect him to," her voice faltered, the memory of the kick and the humiliation flooding her. Mason's grip tightened slightly on her hand. "He miscalculated, that's all, but we're not done yet." Carter's face outside was pale, his hands still trembling. He had underestimated both his sister's resolve and the skill of Mason Beck. He had assumed physical intimidation would silence Ava, and perhaps Mason too. He had been wrong on both counts. Inside, the JAG officer had stepped back to consult with medics. "Lieutenant Beck," he said, voice crisp and professional, "we will need your full statement after her condition is stable." Mason nodded, eyes still on Ava. "Understood." But Carter wasn't done. In the shadows of the hangar, he plotted. If he couldn't assert dominance physically, perhaps bureaucratically, legally, or through reputation, he could regain control. And the thought of Mason Beck standing in his way only fueled his desperation. Back in the infirmary, Ava's fingers curled against the sheet as she pressed lightly against her ribs. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Mason's hand tightened over hers. "Yes, you can. You've survived worse, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here." Outside, Carter's eyes flicked to the JAG officer entering the infirmary. He felt a cold realization. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. He had no allies here, and every move he had made in the hangar was documented, observed, and now scrutinized. Inside, the medical team worked quickly. "We're going to stabilize you for now," one medic said, "but you'll need monitoring and rest. Any sudden movement or strain could make internal bleeding worse." Ava's teeth clenched. "I can handle it," she insisted, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Mason pressed lightly against her shoulder. "Not this. You survive everything else, yes, but this isn't about toughness, it's about surviving smart." Carter's presence outside the infirmary was almost tangible, his desperation radiating like heat. He knew that Mason and Ava were now a united front he could not intimidate or manipulate. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and every move he had made only ensured that he had no control over the narrative anymore. Mason's eyes flicked to Ava as the monitors beeped softly, the pulse steady but strained. "You're tougher than anyone I've met," he said, voice low, "but even the toughest need help sometimes." Ava nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words. I know," she admitted, voice quiet. The JAG officer stepped closer, clipboard in hand. "Lieutenant Beck, your statement will be critical. We need every detail of the assault and subsequent actions." Mason's jaw tightened. "We'll provide it, but I want her stabilized first. No one leaves here until we know she's safe." Carter's face tightened outside. He had misjudged the situation entirely. What he had thought would be a simple show of dominance had spiraled into an institutional nightmare. His arrogance and impulsiveness had set off a chain reaction he could not control, and the legal consequences loomed ominously. Inside, Ava exhaled slowly, leaning slightly against Mason for support. The tension in the room was thick, a mixture of pain, defiance, and anticipation. Mason's protective instincts were on high alert, and he could feel Carter's desperation like a storm about to break. Ava's voice was soft but steady. "Mason, he's going to keep trying, isn't he?" Mason's eyes hardened. "Yes, but we're ready. Whatever he tries, we'll be ready." The monitors beeped steadily, but every pulse felt like a countdown. Outside, Carter's mind raced. He had underestimated two people who refused to bow, and now he faced scrutiny, humiliation, and the undeniable fact that he had no control over the outcome. Mason's gaze swept the room, assessing every risk, every possibility. The storm was coming, and he knew it would be relentless. But he also knew that Ava, resilient and determined despite the pain, could survive it with him by her side. The infirmary doors opened again, footsteps echoing ominously. Carter's eyes narrowed, realizing that his opportunity to regain control was slipping away. He had miscalculated, underestimated, and overreached. And for the first time in decades, General Carter feared that his arrogance might cost him everything. The sun had dipped behind the Colorado peaks, leaving Fort Hardison under a shadowed, cold light. The hangar where the confrontation had erupted earlier seemed deserted now, but the echoes of tension still lingered in every corner of the base. Inside the infirmary, the atmosphere was taut, almost suffocating. Ava Beck lay on the examination table, pale, her breath shallow and labored. Every movement sent a searing pain through her ribs, a cruel reminder of General Carter's earlier kick. Her face was grim, jaw tight, but her eyes glimmered with defiance. She wasn't just fighting injury, she was fighting the humiliation, the fear, and the injustice of the situation. Mason Beck stood beside her like a sentinel, his presence unwavering. Navy SEAL instincts ran through every fiber of his being. He calculated angles, distances, and threats with a precision born from years of life-and-death missions. Every step, every movement, every word was deliberate, protective. "You're stable for now," the medic said, his tone calm but clinical. "But any strain could worsen internal bleeding. No sudden movements, understood?" Ava nodded, biting back a groan as the monitors beeped steadily. Mason's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, ensuring she didn't move unexpectedly. "I understand," she whispered, voice tight with pain. Outside, General Carter's presence was almost palpable. He paced near the infirmary window, muttering under his breath. Every second that passed seemed to amplify his desperation. His pride had been shattered in front of witnesses, his authority undermined, his reputation on the line. And now, facing medical documentation and JAG scrutiny, he realized just how badly he had miscalculated. Carter's mind raced. He had tried physical intimidation, assumed Mason would back down, and believed Ava would be cowed into silence. Instead, the SEAL's calm precision had neutralized him, leaving him powerless and humiliated. The realization gnawed at him, a bitter, suffocating feeling he had never experienced before. Inside the infirmary, the door clicked open again. A legal officer from JAG stepped in, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and calculating. Mason's body tensed, ready for escalation. He didn't step away from Ava, not 1 inch. "Lieutenant Beck," the officer said, voice crisp, "we need your detailed statement. This is a formal investigation." Mason's jaw tightened. "Understood, but she needs stabilization first. We provide statements after she's safe." The officer's gaze flicked to Ava. She pressed a hand to her side, swallowing back pain. "I'll cooperate," she said quietly, voice strained but steady. Carter's pale face pressed against the infirmary window, his expression a mixture of panic, frustration, and calculated rage. He realized that the documentation, the witnesses, and Mason's protection of Ava had shifted the balance entirely. Any move he made now risked permanent consequences. As the JAG officer prepared forms, Ava struggled to sit upright slightly, testing her strength. Pain radiated sharply, forcing her to gasp. Mason's hand was immediately on her ribs, steadying her. "Do not push yourself," he said firmly. "I have to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't let him win this through fear." Mason's jaw tightened, his protective instincts ignited. "Then we do it smart, not reckless." Suddenly, the infirmary door opened again, footsteps echoing through the room. Mason's gaze snapped toward the sound, instincts alert. A figure entered Carter's aid, a man sent to negotiate, intimidate, or possibly manipulate. "Lieutenant Beck," the aide said, voice smooth and authoritative, "General Carter insists on a private conversation. He believes a misunderstanding can be resolved discreetly." Mason's eyes narrowed. There's nothing discreet about assaulting someone and expecting them to comply silently. The aide's expression hardened. He just wants to talk. Mason's posture remained rigid, hand lightly pressing Ava's shoulder. "We're not talking until she's medically cleared, and not a second before." Carter's aide stiffened, realizing Mason's resolve. He left, muttering something under his breath, a warning that the general's desperation was only growing. Hours passed. Ava remained in the infirmary, monitored, supported, and guarded. Mason refused to leave her side, even for a moment. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, not just protecting her physically, but ensuring she had every resource to survive the coming battles, both medical and institutional. Then, in the late evening, the first wave of emails, messages, and calls arrived. Orders were being questioned. Witnesses were reporting events. JAG's review was underway. Carter's desperation had evolved from arrogance to scheming. Inside, Ava's breathing grew more labored. Mason noticed subtle changes, a flicker of paleness, a tremor in her fingers, shallow breaths that hinted the internal injury was worsening. "Ava," he said gently, pressing a stabilizing hand against her side, "we need to keep you calm. Any strain could make this worse." "I'm fine," she whispered, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Pain lanced through her ribs and Mason could feel it through his hands. Outside, Carter's frustration boiled over. He had miscalculated every variable: Ava's resilience, Mason's skill, and the chain of accountability that now hemmed him in. His mind raced for alternatives: intimidation, bureaucratic pressure, reputation attacks, but each option carried risk. The more he acted, the more exposed he became. Inside the infirmary, Mason's instincts screamed. He could feel the tide turning. Ava's vital signs wavered slightly, and he knew the internal bleeding could worsen rapidly. Time was no longer on their side. "Ava," he said quietly, "you need to stay still. We can't risk any movement that might worsen the bleed." She pressed her lips together, nodding despite the pain. I just hate feeling powerless," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. Mason's hand closed over hers, a protective anchor. "You're not powerless. You've survived far worse, but surviving smart, that's the real battle, and we're winning it together." Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the infirmary hallway. Mason's body tensed. He could feel the approach of authority, whether friend or foe, and his eyes flicked toward the door. Carter was out there, scheming. The base itself seemed to hold its breath. A nurse entered quickly, checking monitors. "Pulse is steady but shallow. Keep her calm. Any excitement, any stress could worsen her condition." Mason's eyes hardened. Carter's potential interference was no longer just a personal vendetta, it was a physical threat to Ava, and he would not allow it. Ava's fingers curled around his hand. "Mason, what happens if he doesn't stop?" Mason's gaze swept the room, sharp, vigilant, unyielding. "Then we make sure he can't hurt you. Legally, institutionally, any way necessary. I won't let him win." Outside, Carter's shadow loomed near the infirmary window. His mind raced. The SEAL and the medic had outmaneuvered him at every turn, and now the law, evidence, and protocol threatened to make his arrogance public. Panic flickered across his face, a rare, dangerous emotion for a man used to control. Inside, Ava exhaled shakily, leaning slightly into Mason's support. The monitors beeped steadily, but every pulse felt like a countdown. Time was slipping away, and Mason knew the storm was approaching. Carter's desperation would escalate, and the consequences could be devastating. Mason tightened his hand around hers. "Whatever happens next," he whispered, "we face it together. You're not alone." Ava's eyes glimmered with determination, despite the pain. "I'm not, I won't be." And in that moment, the tension reached its peak. Outside, Carter's frustration, panic, and scheming energy radiated like a storm ready to break. Inside, Mason and Ava prepared, knowing the next confrontation, physical, legal, or psychological, would test their limits like never before. The storm had arrived. Night had fully descended over Fort Hardison, and the base seemed eerily quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Inside the infirmary, Ava Beck lay on the table, pale and trembling, yet her eyes burned with fierce determination. Every shallow breath sent waves of pain through her ribs, a cruel reminder of General Carter's earlier assault. She refused to cry, refused to show weakness, but Mason Beck could see the strain etched into her face. Mason remained at her side, a wall of calm focus. His hand pressed lightly against her shoulder, subtly monitoring for any signs of deterioration. Navy SEAL instincts sharpened every sense. Sounds, movements, even shadows could signal a threat. He didn't leave her side for a second. "Ava, stay calm. Any sudden movement could worsen the bleeding," Mason said quietly, his voice steady but firm. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her shallow breaths betrayed the truth. "Just tired of being treated like a victim." "You're not a victim," Mason said, his gaze unwavering. "You're a survivor, but surviving smart is just as important as surviving strong." Outside, General Carter's shadow loomed at the infirmary window. He had paced for hours, muttering under his breath, his pale face twisted with frustration and panic. His mind raced for ways to reclaim control. Physical intimidation had failed. His reputation had been publicly shattered. Now, legal scrutiny loomed, and every move he made could be documented, scrutinized, and used against him. Carter's panic was compounded by Mason's presence. He had underestimated the seal completely. Mason's calm authority and readiness had rendered Carter powerless. The general's mind worked frantically. If he couldn't dominate them physically, perhaps bureaucratically, legally, or psychologically, he could force compliance. Meanwhile, inside the infirmary, the JAG officer had returned with paperwork. "Lieutenant Beck," he said, voice crisp, "we need a full statement regarding the assault and subsequent events. This is a formal investigation." Mason's posture stiffened, protective instincts flaring. "She's still stabilizing. No statements until she's medically cleared." The officer's eyes flicked to Ava. "Her condition is stable, but we still need preliminary statements for the investigation." Ava swallowed hard, the tremor in her hands betraying her determination. "I'll cooperate," she whispered, voice strained but resolute. Mason's gaze softened briefly. "We'll do this together, but we wait until you're safe." Outside, Carter's frustration was boiling over. He had tried intimidation, misjudged both Mason's skill and Ava's resilience, and now he faced the possibility that his career and reputation were in jeopardy. Every attempt to manipulate or assert control had been thwarted, leaving him desperate and dangerous. As the evening wore on, Ava's condition subtly worsened. Mason noticed the faint pallor creeping across her lips, the shallow, uneven breaths, the subtle tremor in her fingers. He pressed lightly against her shoulder. "Ava, we need to be careful. This is getting serious." "I can handle it," she whispered, teeth clenched, trying to fight back the pain. "No," Mason said firmly. "You don't have to handle this alone." Suddenly, the infirmary door opened and Carter's aide stepped in, face controlled but eyes sharp. "Lieutenant Beck," he said, voice smooth, "General Carter insists on a private conversation. He believes a misunderstanding can be resolved discreetly." Mason's body tensed. There's nothing discreet about assaulting someone and expecting silence. The aide's expression hardened. "He just wants to talk." "We're not talking until she's cleared by medical staff," Mason replied, voice cold and steady. The aide left, muttering a warning that only fueled Mason's vigilance. He returned to Ava's side, checking the monitors. Her pulse was steady but shallow, her breaths labored. The internal bleeding was subtle but dangerous, and Mason's instincts screamed that every second mattered. Hours passed. Carter's desperation only escalated. Messages, emails, calls, all evidence of his scheming began to pile up. The JAG investigation was underway, and he realized he had no allies. Mason and Ava had shifted the balance, turning the general's arrogance into his vulnerability. Inside, Ava's eyes fluttered shut briefly, exhausted by pain and stress. Mason's hand hovered over her ribs, alert to every subtle change. "You need to rest," he whispered. "I've got you." Ava's fingers pressed lightly against his hand. I don't want him to win," she murmured. Mason's eyes hardened. "He won't, not while I'm here, not while you're here." Outside, Carter's pale face appeared again at the window. His frustration and panic radiated like a storm. He had miscalculated completely. Ava's resilience, Mason's skill, and the unfolding legal and institutional consequences had rendered him powerless. Suddenly, a call came from the command center. Carter's voice, sharp with panic, barked orders to summon security personnel, looking for a way to regain control. Mason's instincts flared immediately. This was no longer just a legal or bureaucratic battle. It could escalate to physical confrontation. He moved subtly closer to Ava, his presence a shield. "Whatever he tries next, we're ready," he said quietly. Ava's eyes met his, a mixture of trust and fear. I don't know if I can survive him again, she whispered. You already have, Mason said, gripping her hand firmly. And this isn't over, but I will not let him hurt you. Not again. Not ever. Carter's desperation became almost tangible. The more he schemed, the more reckless he became. Outside, he was formulating his next move, a mixture of intimidation, bureaucratic manipulation, and psychological pressure. But Mason anticipated every possibility, his mind calculating, his instincts sharp, his resolve unbreakable. Suddenly, the infirmary doors opened. Another officer entered, bearing official documentation of Carter's actions, witnessed accounts, and statements from soldiers present during the assault. Mason's eyes narrowed as he saw the stack of evidence. Every piece cemented the general's accountability. Carter's face, visible through the window, twisted with panic and rage. His miscalculations had compounded. His physical aggression, his arrogance, and now his attempts at manipulation were all documented. He had created a chain reaction that left him exposed on multiple fronts. Inside, Mason reviewed the documents quickly, ensuring Ava's protection and preparing for any escalation. This storm isn't over, he said quietly to her. Ava's gaze was fierce despite the exhaustion. Then we face it together, she whispered. Mason's hand pressed lightly against her shoulder. Together, he echoed, eyes locked on the approaching storm. The base seemed to hold its breath. Outside, Carter's frustration, desperation, and scheming energy radiated like a tempest ready to break. Inside, Mason and Ava braced for the climax of the confrontation that had begun hours earlier in the hangar. The storm was coming. The first rays of dawn sliced through the blinds of the infirmary, painting long shadows across the room. Ava Beck lay on the examination table, pale but resolute. Her breaths were still shallow, her ribs throbbing with pain, but there was a fire in her eyes that no amount of fear or physical harm could extinguish. Mason Beck had been at her side all night, his presence a constant shield, his Navy SEAL instincts honed for moments just like this. Every subtle sound, every shift in shadows, every movement outside the infirmary kept his attention sharp. He knew Carter's desperation was reaching a boiling point, and it could erupt at any moment. Outside, the base was waking. The first shift of soldiers arrived, their routines unaware of the storm that had unfolded hours earlier. But inside, the tension was palpable. Carter's shadow appeared at the infirmary window, pale-faced and frantic. His packing was manic, and his fingers drummed against the glass like a trapped animal. Hours of scheming had failed him. His physical intimidation had backfired, Mason's calm authority had neutralized him, and now the weight of evidence and legal scrutiny loomed over him like a guillotine. Every witness statement, every report, and every medical record painted him as the aggressor. His arrogance had become his vulnerability. Inside, Ava shifted slightly, testing her strength. Mason's hand immediately pressed against her side, steadying her. "Careful," he said firmly. "You're still not out of danger." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "But I can't stay passive. He needs to face consequences." Mason's gaze softened but remained vigilant. "And he will, but smart, not reckless. That's how we win this." At that moment, the infirmary doors opened with authority. A high-ranking JAG officer stepped in, flanked by 2 witnesses and carrying a thick folder of evidence. Mason's stance shifted, protective yet cooperative. "Lieutenant Beck, Ms. Beck," the officer began, voice precise and commanding, "we are here to conduct the formal review of General Carter's actions. Everything will be documented, and your safety is our priority." Carter, visible through the window, pressed his hands to his face. Panic flickered across his eyes. The chain of evidence, the witnesses, the medical records, everything was converging against him. He realized too late that his every action had been a miscalculation. Inside, Mason guided Ava to sit up slightly, supporting her with care. Her strength had returned in part, her resolve undiminished despite the pain. The JAG officer began reviewing witness statements, evidence, and medical documentation. Each revelation, each corroborated account, tightened the net around Carter's misconduct. Carter's pale face grew more desperate. He had always relied on rank, reputation, and fear to maintain control. But now, all of it was meaningless. Mason and Ava had transformed the battlefield into one where truth, courage, and resilience mattered more than rank. Finally, the officer looked at Carter directly. "General Carter, you are being formally charged with assault and abuse of authority. Your actions have been documented, witnessed, and medically verified. You will face full accountability under military law." Carter's face went white, his lips trembling. For the first time in decades, a man accustomed to absolute authority was powerless. His eyes darted between Mason and Ava, understanding fully that he had underestimated them both, and that miscalculation had brought him here. Ava's eyes met Mason's, a mixture of relief, pain, and triumph. "We did it," she whispered, voice hoarse but steady. Mason's hand pressed lightly against hers. "No, you did it," he said firmly. "You stood your ground, you survived, you made him accountable." Carter's aide arrived, attempting to mediate, to persuade, to manipulate. Mason's eyes didn't leave him. "No interference," he said sharply. "He's done." The general's panic was now pure desperation. His reputation, career, and authority, all shattered in the span of hours. For the first time, he experienced what it was like to face someone unafraid, unyielding, and ready to confront injustice. Outside the infirmary, soldiers whispered, witnessing the fall of a man once untouchable. Inside, Ava's pulse steadied slightly, her breathing still shallow but more controlled. Mason continued to monitor her, protective and calm. Then came the moment of resolution. Carter was escorted by military police, his protests ignored. The weight of his miscalculations, his arrogance, and his violence followed him with every step. For the first time, he was no longer the authority. He was subject to the system he had sought to dominate. Ava exhaled, finally allowing herself a small measure of relief. "It's over," she whispered. Mason's gaze remained vigilant but softer now. "It's not just over," he said. "You survived, you're safe, and the truth is on your side." She smiled faintly, the pain still evident but her spirit unbroken. I couldn't have done it without you." Mason shook his head. "You did it. I was just here to make sure you could." Outside the infirmary, the dawn light grew brighter. Carter's shadow receded, replaced by the quiet hum of a base returning to routine. Soldiers moved with a newfound respect, whispers of what had happened spreading silently through the ranks. Ava had not only survived, she had transformed fear into courage, weakness into undeniable strength. Mason helped her to her feet, steadying her. "One step at a time," he said, guiding her slowly toward the exit. She looked at him, determination burning in her eyes. "Next time," she said softly, "I won't just survive, I'll thrive." Mason smiled, proud and protective. "And I'll be right there with you." As they walked toward the base gates, the story of General Carter's downfall began to ripple outward. A lesson in arrogance, courage, and accountability that no rank, no title, no act of intimidation could erase. Ava's resilience, Mason's protection, and the unyielding pursuit of justice had shifted the balance. The once mighty general had miscalculated one final time, and it had cost him everything. The sun fully broke over the horizon, golden and fierce. For Ava and Mason, it was more than a new day. It was a testament to survival, courage, and the unbreakable bond between siblings facing impossible odds. And somewhere behind them, in the shadows of Fort Hardison, the echoes of a man's arrogance faded, replaced by the enduring truth. Strength, honor, and courage cannot be intimidated, broken, or silenced. The storm had passed, the reckoning was complete,